The room went quiet in a way I had only ever heard once before on the deck of a ship when a commanding officer stepped forward unexpectedly. My father's voice still hung in the air. "Only important people were invited," he said, not shouting, not angry, just certain, not you. I had already turned toward the aisle. I remember thinking, at least I won't make a scene. I had learned that skill early. But before I could take a second step, a hand touched my sleeve, gentle, respectful, unmistakably deliberate. "Ma'am," the groom said behind me, his voice steady but carrying across the church. "Please don't leave. This is the moment. Everyone needs to know who you are." Every head turned, my father's face drained of color, and for a split second I wished the groom had let me go. I didn't want that moment, I never had. 3 hours earlier, I had stood alone in the small hotel bathroom fastening a simple pearl necklace I'd worn for years. No uniform, no insignia, just a navy blue dress I'd bought off the rack in Norfolk before my last deployment. Practical, quiet, appropriate. That had always been my way. I hadn't received a formal invitation to my younger sister's wedding. I heard about it from a cousin who assumed I already knew. "It's in May," she said casually over the phone. "At St. Andrews. You'll come right." I paused longer than I should have. Of course, I said. Family was family, or at least that's what I still told myself. My father and I hadn't argued in years. We hadn't really talked either. Silence had settled between us like dust on unused furniture. He believed I'd chosen distance over devotion, career over kin. I believed some things didn't need defending. I drove in the night before the wedding, a long stretch of highway I knew well. The same roads I'd taken as a girl when my mother was still alive, when my sister and I shared a bedroom, when my father still looked at me with something like expectation instead of disappointment. The church was already buzzing when I arrived that morning. Florists hurried in and out. Guests clustered in small laughing groups. I slipped inside quietly and took a seat near the back. That was when I realized something was off. No one greeted me. No one waved me over. A few relatives glanced my way, then looked quickly elsewhere. It wasn't hostility, it was confusion, as if my presence didn't fit the picture they had in their minds. I stayed seated, hands folded, eyes forward. Years of briefings and hearings had taught me patience. When my father finally noticed me, it was not with surprise but irritation. He approached slowly, his jaw tight, his tie already loosened. "What are you doing here?" he asked in a low voice. "I came for the wedding," I said, "for Emily." He shook his head once. "You weren't invited." The words landed softly, but they landed all the same. "I'm her sister," I said, keeping my voice even. "That doesn't make you welcome," he replied. "Today is about important people, people who were there." I looked past him toward my sister's dressing room. The door was closed. "I won't cause trouble," I said. "I'll sit in the back." He leaned closer. "I don't want you here," he said plainly. "You always make things complicated." I thought of missed birthdays, of holidays spent overseas, of calls that went unanswered because time zones didn't align. I thought of all the times I'd chosen not to explain myself. "I'll go," I said. That seemed to satisfy him. He stepped back, already turning away, the matter settled in his mind. I stood, smoothed my dress, took a breath, and that was when the groom intervened. I hadn't spoken to him more than twice before. A polite man, observant, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. I knew he worked in logistics. I also knew how we'd first met years earlier at a small fundraising event for wounded service members. He hadn't known then who I was, and I'd preferred it that way. Now his hand rested lightly on my sleeve. "Sir," he said, addressing my father first with respect, "please step aside." My father stared at him. "This is a family matter." The groom nodded. "It is, which is why she's staying." A murmur rippled through the pews. "I don't think you understand," my father said. "She doesn't belong here." The groom met his eyes. "I understand perfectly," he replied. Then he turned to me. "Ma'am, I know this is uncomfortable, but I need you to stay." I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger but dread. This was exactly what I'd hoped to avoid. "Please," I said quietly, "let it be." He shook his head once. "No," he said, "not today." From the corner of my eye, I noticed a man 2 rows ahead straighten in his seat. Silver hair, military posture. His gaze locked onto me with sudden recognition. My stomach tightened. I had spent a lifetime keeping compartments sealed, family here, service there, titles left at the door. And now, standing in a small-town church filled with flowers and whispered judgments, those walls were about to come down. I took my hand from the groom's sleeve and faced the room. I had come to support my sister. I had not come to be seen. But some moments I was learning don't ask for permission. The groom's words didn't create noise so much as they created a pause, one of those sudden collective hesitations where people forget what they were doing and simply stare. My father recovered first. He always did. He let out a short, humorless breath and turned slightly so he could address the groom without raising his voice. "This is not the time," he said. "We have guests. We have a schedule." The groom didn't move his hand from my sleeve, but he relaxed his grip like he was reminding me I still had a choice. "I understand," he said, "but I won't ask her to leave." My father's mouth tightened. "You're being polite." "That's admirable," he said as if he were speaking to a teenage boy who didn't understand adult reality. "But you don't know the history." The truth was he didn't know it either. Not really. He knew the version he'd told himself. I could feel eyes on my back, relatives I hadn't seen in years. Friends of my sister's, women in pastel dresses holding programs like shields. I hated being the reason people looked away from the bride. That had been my first thought from the moment my father approached me. "Don't ruin her day." "I'm sorry," I said softly, mostly to the groom. "It's fine, I'll go." My father nodded as if that settled it. But the groom's voice stayed steady. "No, ma'am," he said. "It's not fine." The man in the second row, the one with the silver hair, had fully turned now. His face held the careful neutrality of someone trained not to show surprise in public. But his eyes were too focused, too familiar. I felt a small sinking recognition in my chest, the way you feel when you realize a quiet plan is about to be interrupted. My father didn't notice any of that. He was still speaking low and sharp, aimed at me. "You had years," he said. "Years to be part of this family. Emily needed you, and you were always somewhere else." "Dad," I began, but the word came out smaller than I meant it to. He lifted his hand not to hush me but to stop me from defending myself as if my explanation would only embarrass him. "Don't," he said, "don't make it about you. Not today." I looked toward the side door where my sister would enter in a little while. I pictured her as a girl with grass-stained knees running up the porch steps. I pictured her at 16 borrowing my sweater without asking. I pictured her after Mom died standing in the kitchen with red eyes holding a mug she never drank from. I did not picture her turning her sister away at her own wedding. But when I finally saw her briefly, it wasn't a picture that comforted me. The door to the small room beside the sanctuary opened an inch, and my sister's maid of honor peeked out. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of white fabric, and my sister's face, half-made-up lips pressed together. Our eyes met for a beat. Then she looked away. Not angry, not cruel, just unwilling, as if acknowledging me would force her to deal with something she'd decided to set aside. That was when the ache became something different. Not sharp, not dramatic, just heavy. My father followed my gaze and seemed to take my sister's avoidance as confirmation of his position. "There," he said quietly. "She doesn't want this. She has enough stress. Don't add yourself to it." "I didn't come to add anything," I replied. My voice stayed calm, but it took effort. I came to sit in the back and be family. He scoffed under his breath. "Family," he repeated like it was a word that required proof. People nearby pretended not to listen, but they were. You can tell when someone is pretending. Their eyes go too still. My father stepped closer. "Do you know what people are saying?" he asked. "They're saying you couldn't even keep a job, that you drifted, that you ran off, that Emily had to make something of herself without you." My throat tightened, but I didn't correct him. Correcting him would have turned this into an argument. And arguments were my father's favorite kind of stage. "You've always been so secretive," he continued. "So proud, like you're above us." That one almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was backwards. I had spent years doing the opposite of pride. I had swallowed details and bitten back corrections and let people assume whatever made them comfortable. I'd done it in my career too, in different ways, learning when to speak and when to let silence do the work. But family was harder than any briefing room. Because in family, silence didn't read as discipline, it read as guilt. I'm not above anyone, I said. Just what he snapped louder now, and a few heads turned more openly. He caught himself and lowered his voice again the way someone lowers a weapon but doesn't put it away. Just had better things to do. That's what you've always implied. The groom's hand finally slipped away from my sleeve, but he stayed close. His presence didn't feel like ownership, it felt like protection. My father looked at him with annoyance. "This doesn't concern you," he said. "It concerns me," the groom replied, "because she's my family now too." My father blinked, thrown off by the firmness. And in that small shift I saw something I'd seen in him before: fear. Not fear of me, fear of losing control of the story. I wanted to make it easy for everyone. I wanted my sister to walk down the aisle without whispers following her. I wanted my father to feel proud because I still carried that old foolish hope that one day he might look at me the way he used to. So I did what I always did when there was a choice between pride and peace. I chose peace. "I'm leaving," I said clearly, so the groom wouldn't have to argue on my behalf. I turned toward him and forced a faint smile. "Thank you," I added. "Truly. But it's okay." His eyes held mine. "It's not," he said again, quieter now, as if he were speaking only to me. I moved one step down the aisle. And that was when my father delivered the line that would follow me for weeks. "Only important people were invited," he said loud enough for the nearest pews to hear. "Not you." It wasn't just the words, it was the certainty behind them. The way he said it, like a fact the room would naturally agree with. I felt something in me go still, not anger, not revenge, something more sobering. If my own father could look at me and decide I wasn't important, then he had never understood what mattered, and he had never tried. I took another step and the church door seemed suddenly very far away. Then the groom caught my sleeve again, firmer this time, and his voice carried with a respectful authority that made the room settle. "Ma'am," he said, "please don't go." I turned back, heart beating slow and heavy. He looked past me toward the guests and said the words that changed the air. "It's time," he said, "everyone knows who you are." For a moment I thought he meant something simple, something sentimental. That he was going to tell the room I was his fiancée's sister, that family should stay together, that weddings weren't the time to settle old grudges. I could have lived with that. But the way he said it, "it's time," carried the weight of a decision already made. He released my sleeve, stepped forward into the center aisle, and faced the front of the church like he was about to speak vows instead of warnings. "Before we begin," he said, his voice calm, "I need to address something." A few people chuckled nervously, expecting a harmless announcement. The pastor shifted his feet, glancing at the wedding coordinator near the side door. The florist froze mid-adjustment of a ribbon. My father's eyes narrowed. "No," he mouthed, barely audible. I stood near the back, hands clasped, wanting to fold myself into the wood of the pew. I had never wanted to be a headline in my own family. I'd spent my life learning how to exist without taking up space. But the groom was doing the opposite. He was making space, and he was making it for me. "I'm sorry," I whispered to him, stepping closer. "This is going to hurt Emily." He turned his head slightly, not fully looking at me, but hearing me. "It won't hurt her," he said. "Not in the long run." That wasn't a guarantee anyone could make. But he said it like he believed it. He lifted his chin and continued. "Most of you know me," he said. "And most of you know I'm not the kind of man who likes drama. I like plans, I like schedules, I like things to run the way they're supposed to." A ripple of polite laughter, a few nods. "But today," he went on, "I'm seeing something that doesn't sit right with me, something I can't ignore." My father stepped into the aisle as if he could physically block the words from spreading. "Son," he said sharply, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "we can talk after." The groom's expression stayed respectful. "Sir," he said, "I'm asking you to give me 1 minute." My father's smile tightened. "This is a wedding." "Yes," the groom replied, "and we're about to make vows about honor and commitment and family. So it matters how we treat people, especially the ones who don't fight back." The air shifted. No one was laughing now. My sister's maid of honor cracked the side door open again, her face pale. I saw her whisper something into the room behind it. A second later, the door opened wider and my sister appeared at the threshold, holding part of her gown in her hands. She looked beautiful in a way that almost made me forget the ache in my chest. Her hair was pinned up, her makeup soft, her bouquet still on the table behind her. She was not yet in the role of bride walking down an aisle. She was still my sister. Her gaze went straight to me, then to our father, then back to the groom. "What's happening?" she whispered, though the church was quiet enough that the question carried. My father tried to move toward her, but the wedding coordinator caught his elbow, murmuring something about staying calm. The groom turned slightly so he could address my sister without excluding the room. "Emily," he said, "gentle now, I love you. And I'm not trying to ruin today. I'm trying to do something right." My sister swallowed. "This isn't the time," she said, but her voice wasn't angry, it sounded afraid. I wanted to tell her I'd leave. I wanted to rescue her from this moment the way older sisters try to rescue younger ones, even when no rescue is asked for. But my father spoke first. "She's leaving," he said, pointing at me as if I were an object being removed. "That's what's happening." My sister's eyes flickered. For a second I thought she might say, "No, stay," even if she didn't mean it, even if it was just etiquette. Instead, she said nothing. The groom's shoulders rose with a quiet inhale. Then he looked out over the pews again. "Years ago," he said, "I attended a small event in Norfolk, a fundraiser for wounded service members and their families." That made several heads turn. Norfolk was not far from here, but it sounded distant in this room, like a story from another life. "I wasn't in the military," he continued. "I was there because my company was donating equipment and transportation support. I didn't know anyone. I was new and I felt out of place." A couple of older men in the front pews exchanged looks as if trying to place the memory. "And that night," he said, "a woman helped me. She didn't do it loudly, she didn't make a speech, she just noticed I looked lost and pointed me in the right direction. She made sure a Gold Star mother found a seat. She carried someone's walker without being asked. And when I thanked her, she smiled like it was nothing." My throat tightened. I remembered that night. I'd been tired running on coffee and obligation, trying to keep the event from unraveling because the organizer's husband had been hospitalized unexpectedly. I hadn't thought of it as generosity. I'd thought of it as responsibility. The groom's eyes found me now, briefly like a thread tying the story to the present. "I didn't know her name at the time," he said. "I didn't know what she did for a living. I only knew she carried herself with the kind of calm you don't fake." My father's face had gone still, my sister's lips parted, slightly confused. The groom continued. Later that evening, an older gentleman approached her. He spoke to her with a kind of respect I'd never seen outside my grandfather's church circles. He addressed her with a title. I felt my heart drop because I knew what was coming. The silver-haired man in the second row, still watching me, straightened again, as if he'd been holding himself back out of courtesy and could no longer do it. The groom's voice remained even. He said, "Ma'am," and then he said her rank. The word rank seemed to echo in the church, impossible and out of place among lilies and wedding programs. My father barked a short laugh, sharp with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he muttered. The groom didn't flinch. "I'm talking about her," he said, nodding toward me, "and the fact that she's been treated like she's nothing." My sister took a shaky step forward, her dress brushing the doorway. What rank?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I had spent years not saying it. Then the silver-haired man stood, fully turning toward the front with the quiet authority of someone who had given orders in far more serious places than a wedding. He looked at me, not asking permission, not seeking attention, just acknowledging what he knew. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but respectful, "with your permission." I wanted to stop him, I did. But my father had already built the stage. The groom had already turned on the lights. And there was no way to go back to the quiet corner. I could have lied. I could have waved my hand and said, "No, it's nothing," and tried to tuck myself back into the corner where I belonged. That was my first instinct, the one trained into me by years of learning when to speak and when silence served better. But the man standing in the second row wasn't a stranger to silence. He was the kind of person who respected it, and also knew when it became its own kind of harm. He waited still with his hands at his sides, posture, straight eyes steady on mine. "Please," I said, barely more than breath. Not permission, not refusal, just a plea for restraint. Not here. He gave the smallest nod as if to say he understood, and then he did it anyway. "Ma'am," he said, turning slightly so his voice carried without becoming a spectacle. "I won't embarrass you. But I can't sit here and watch your family speak to you like you're disposable." A few older guests shifted in their seats. Someone's program slipped from their fingers and fluttered softly onto the floor. The pastor stepped back, uncertain whether he should intervene or simply witness. My father's eyes flicked between the groom and the silver-haired man like he was watching a card trick he couldn't figure out. "What is this?" he snapped. "Who are you?" The man answered without ego. "Retired Navy," he said, "and a friend." My father scoffed. "A friend of hers." He pointed at me again. "She doesn't have friends. She disappears for years and expects everyone to clap when she shows up." I felt my face warm, not from shame but from the old familiar frustration of being spoken about like I wasn't standing right there. The groom didn't raise his voice. That was what made it more powerful. He looked at my father and said, "You keep saying important people. Do you know what important looks like?" My father's jaw worked once. "I know what matters in a family," he said. The groom nodded slowly as if considering that. "Then let's test it," he replied. "Let's see what matters when you're not controlling the narrative." My sister stood frozen near the side door, one hand pressed to her waist, as if she needed something solid to hold herself together. Her eyes were wide, not angry, not cruel, just stunned by the sudden shift in gravity. She looked from me to our father like she was seeing a triangle drawn in the air that she'd never noticed before. "Tell me the truth," she whispered to my father. "What? What did you think she was doing all these years?" My father hesitated, and that hesitation was its own answer. "She always said she had work," he muttered. "Some office job, some government thing. I don't know. She never talked about it. And when your mother was sick, she wasn't here." The last line landed like a stone in my gut. It was the accusation that lived under everything else. I swallowed hard. "Dad," I said as gently as I could manage, "Mom didn't want you to call me back from deployment. She said it herself." His face hardened. "That's convenient," he said. The groom's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed calm. "That's cruel," he corrected. "And it's not true." My father opened his mouth to fire back, but the silver-haired man spoke again, cutting through the tension with the steady tone of someone used to command decks and briefing rooms. "Sir," he said to my father, "you don't have to like it. But you do need to understand who you're talking to." My father stared at him. "And who is she?" he demanded, as if daring the room to laugh. The man took a breath, looked at me one last time, almost like an apology, and then pivoted toward the front where my sister stood in white, and the groom stood with one hand still slightly lifted as if he was trying to keep the moment from tipping into chaos. The man spoke clearly, and his words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded factual. "This woman," he said, "is a rear admiral in the United States Navy." There was a beat of absolute silence. Then a sound, small, involuntary, escaped someone near the front. A sharp inhale like surprise turning into something close to embarrassment. My father's face didn't change right away. He looked at me as if waiting for me to correct the man, to shake my head, to laugh, and admit it was a misunderstanding. I didn't. My sister's mouth fell open slightly. She stared at me the way you stare at someone you've known your whole life and suddenly realize you have never truly known. She began, but she couldn't finish. The pastor cleared his throat softly, and then seemed to think better of it because, what do you say when a family's entire story rearranges itself in the middle of a wedding? The groom remained quiet, letting the words settle where they needed to settle. My father finally found his voice. "That's not—" he started and then stopped. His eyes searched mine for denial. "I didn't want it to be a thing," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "I didn't want my job to be the only reason you treated me differently." My father's lips parted. He looked around the church as if hoping someone would hand him a better explanation. The silver-haired man wasn't finished, but he kept it simple. "She has served for decades," he said. "She has led sailors. She has made decisions that keep people alive. And she's done it without asking for praise from anyone, especially not the people she wanted love from most." My father's eyes glistened, and that startled me more than anything. I had seen him angry 100 times. I had rarely seen him lost. My sister took a step forward, the hem of her gown whispering against the floor. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice breaking on the last word. I looked at her, really looked. Not as a child, not as the sister I once protected, as a woman on the edge of her own life trying to figure out where I fit in it. Because I wanted to be your sister, I said quietly, not your headline. My father's shoulders sagged just a fraction, like something inside him had finally given way, not pride, not anger, but the weight of being wrong. And the groom standing in the center aisle gave my father one long, steady look and said, not loudly, not cruelly, but with unmistakable finality, "Now you know. So choose what kind of man you want to be next." My father didn't explode the way people imagine men like him do. He didn't shout, he didn't throw accusations like plates. He simply went quiet. And in that quiet, I could almost see the years stacking up behind his eyes, the version of me he'd carried around, the one he'd repeated to neighbors and cousins and himself, until it felt true. The daughter who ran off. The daughter who couldn't settle. The daughter who never showed up. It's a strange kind of grief, realizing you've been mourned while you're still alive. My sister Emily stood in the side doorway as if she'd forgotten how to walk. Her bouquet was still missing. Her veil wasn't pinned. She looked less like a bride and more like a little girl caught in an argument she didn't understand, except she was old enough now to understand it all at once. The groom, Mark, didn't move closer to her right away. He stayed where he was in the aisle, letting the air cool. He'd done what he meant to do. Now he wasn't going to make it worse by hovering. The silver-haired man sat back down slowly, not triumphantly, not proudly, just quietly, like his job was done. People began to breathe again. I heard the soft rustle of clothes as guests shifted. A woman in the front row whispered something into her husband's ear, and he shook his head slowly, as if his world had tilted and he was trying to steady it. I felt every eye on me, and I wanted to disappear. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want my sister's wedding to become my unveiling. I turned toward my father. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low, "we can talk later. Please don't do this here." He stared at me for a long second, and then he looked away, like the sight of me was suddenly complicated. "Rear Admiral," he repeated, almost soundless. The words didn't fit his mouth. "No, that's not." "You don't have to call me that," I said quickly. "Please don't." That made him flinch. Not because I'd corrected him, but because he realized there were rules now, boundaries I'd grown without him noticing. Emily finally stepped out of the doorway, slow and careful, the way you step onto ice when you're not sure it will hold. "Is it true?" she asked me, and her eyes didn't accuse. They pleaded. I nodded once, yes. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. But she didn't. She just stared, and I could almost hear her rereading our entire childhood like pages flipping too fast. "You never said anything," she whispered. "I didn't want to make it a thing," I said. "I didn't want you to feel like you had to treat me differently." Emily glanced at Dad. "He treats you like you're..." "Nothing," she said, the words slipping out before she could soften them. My father's head snapped toward her. "Don't," he warned, but it had no force in it. It sounded like habit. Mark walked toward Emily, then, not rushing, not dragging the moment forward. He reached her gently, took her hand, and looked at her with the kind of steadiness that had made me respect him, long before I knew he was marrying my sister. "I'm sorry," he said to her. "I didn't want to do this today, but I couldn't watch it." Emily blinked hard. "Why didn't you tell me you knew her?" she asked, and that question was layered with so much confusion, embarrassment, maybe even a little fear that she'd been fooled. Mark shook his head. "I didn't know," he said. "Not until months ago, when your father made a comment at dinner. About her being a dropout, about her running off. I asked questions. And then I recognized her name in a place I didn't expect to see it." Emily looked back at me, still trying to connect dots. "Where?" I hesitated because part of me still wanted to keep the compartments closed, but the room had already cracked them open. "A program," I said simply, "a Navy leadership briefing. My name was on it. Mark saw it." Emily exhaled shakily. "So you're not..." She stopped, like she couldn't bear to say what she'd half believed. "Not a failure. Not a nobody." "I'm still me," I said. "I'm still your sister." The pastor cleared his throat again, gentle this time. "Perhaps," he said, looking between Emily and Mark with careful kindness, "we should take a few minutes." A short pause. The wedding coordinator nodded quickly, grateful for anything that sounded like a plan. "Yes," she murmured. "Everyone just, please remain seated. We'll resume shortly." As guests murmured, Emily looked at Dad again. "Did you really not know?" she asked him, and now her voice was sharper. Dad's face tightened, and I saw pride trying to rise his reflex to defend himself, but it got tangled in something else. Something like shame. "She never told us," he said, like that settled the matter. I didn't argue. I just held his gaze until he couldn't. And then quietly he said something I hadn't expected. "I thought you were gone," he admitted, the words scraping out of him. "Not dead, just gone. Like your mother, like when things end and you don't get to ask why." My chest tightened. Mom's name was still the one soft place in him. He used it like a shield, sometimes proof that he'd suffered too. "I wasn't gone," I said. "I was working, I was serving." "You could have called," he said, and there it was, the old argument, the simple one that ignored the complicated truth. "I did," I replied. "I left messages. You didn't return them." His eyes flashed. "Because every time you called it felt like you were calling from a different world, like you didn't need us." That was the heart of it, wasn't it? Not that I'd abandoned them, that my absence made him feel unnecessary. Mark guided Emily toward the side room again, whispering something to her I couldn't hear. She glanced back once and there was hurt in her face, but also something else, recognition maybe. The understanding that our family story hadn't been missing pieces. It had been written wrong. My father stepped closer to me, away from the guests' ears. His voice dropped rougher now. "So, all those years, Okinawa, Norfolk, wherever, you weren't just drifting." I almost smiled at that word, drifting, because it was the opposite of the life I'd lived. My world had been schedules and orders and responsibility, the weight of other people's safety. "No," I said, "I wasn't drifting." His jaw clenched. "Then why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, and there was anger in it, but it sounded less like accusation now and more like panic, like a man realizing he'd been wrong and wanting someone to blame besides himself. I kept my voice calm, because I wanted you to want me without needing a title. That landed hard. I saw it in his eyes, the sudden understanding that he hadn't wanted me, not fully, not as I was. His shoulders sagged just a little, and for the first time all morning his voice softened. "I thought important meant present," he said. "I thought it meant showing up to barbecues and fixing things around the house. I thought you'd chosen not to be part of us." "I chose to serve," I said, "and I also chose for a long time not to fight you about it." He stared at me and his voice went quiet again. "And you let me believe you were nothing." I swallowed. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe," I said gently, "because every time I tried to explain, you didn't hear me." For a moment he looked like he might say something, an apology maybe, but his mouth opened and closed without sound, and he turned his face away, blinking too fast. The church around us began to settle into a waiting hush again, but nothing felt the same. Not the flowers, not the music, not the word family. I stood there, breathing slowly, and realized something that surprised me. This wasn't the moment I dreaded. This was the moment I'd been avoiding my whole life, because now the truth was out in the open and my father had nowhere left to hide from it. The wedding coordinator did her best to patch the morning back together with tape and whispered instructions. People were guided to stay seated. Someone adjusted the music. The florist retied a ribbon with trembling fingers. But a rupture like that doesn't disappear just because you smooth the surface. My sister returned to the side room and the door shut behind her. For several minutes nothing moved except the slow turning of heads, the exchanging of quiet looks, the soft shifting of older knees in pews. My father stood rigid near the aisle, hands at his sides, eyes fixed on the stained glass window above the altar, as if staring hard enough might change what had been said. I stepped toward him, careful the way you approach someone in shock. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low, "Emily needs you to pull yourself together." He didn't look at me. "Don't tell me what she needs," he muttered. I didn't argue. I just let a few seconds pass. Then I said, "I'm not here to punish you." That made him finally turn. His eyes were red around the edges, though he'd held himself together. He looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in wear. "You always talk like you're above it," he said. Like nothing can touch you. I took a breath. That's not true, I said. It's just, I learned a long time ago that reacting doesn't fix anything. He scoffed softly. So you're calm. Congratulations. There it was again, his bitterness toward my steadiness, as if my ability to hold myself meant I didn't feel. I looked past him at the front of the church where the pastor stood quietly, hands folded, waiting. I thought of my mother, how she used to smooth my father's roughness by simply placing a hand on his arm and lowering her voice. She had been the only one who could. Without her, my father's emotions had nowhere to go but outward. I'm going to check on Emily, I said. He nodded stiffly like permission was still his to give. I walked toward the side room and knocked softly. Em, I called through the door. It's me. Silence. Then the door cracked open just enough for my sister's maid of honor to peer out. Her eyes were glossy. She's overwhelmed, she whispered. I understand, I said. Can I come in? The maid of honor hesitated, then opened the door wider. Emily sat on a chair in the corner, her dress gathered around her like spilled milk. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles looked pale. She didn't look up when I entered. I didn't rush to her. I stood a few feet away, letting her have space. I didn't want this, she said, finally, voice shaky. I didn't want everyone looking at us like we're some kind of spectacle, I finished gently. Emily's eyes flicked up to mine, and I saw anger there now, real anger mixed with embarrassment and pain. Why didn't you tell me, she asked again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was accusation. All those years you let Dad talk about you like you were a mess, like you couldn't keep your life together, and you just took it. I swallowed. I didn't take it, I said carefully. I just didn't fight it. That's the same thing, she snapped, and then her voice broke. Do you know how stupid I feel? You're not stupid, I said. Emily laughed bitterly. I am. I believed him. I believed you were doing nothing. Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. She had earned the right to be hurt. I sat on the edge of a chair opposite her, keeping my posture relaxed. Emily, I said, I didn't keep it secret to make you look bad. I kept it secret because I didn't want rank to become the only language we spoke. She wiped at her cheek quickly, smearing a little mascara. But you let Dad treat you like you weren't important. And you let me be okay with it. That was the first time she'd admitted her part in it, and it landed heavier than her anger. I nodded. That's fair, I said. You were younger. You wanted peace. I get it. Emily stared down at her hands. Mark knew, she murmured. Not at first, I said. He recognized my name later. She shook her head slowly, and he still chose to do that, in front of everyone. I hesitated. He did it because he loves you, I said, and because he couldn't watch someone you love be discarded. Emily pressed her lips together. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she said quieter, now Dad's going to be humiliated. I watched her carefully. Do you want him protected, I asked, or do you want the truth? Her eyes flashed, but she didn't answer right away. I don't know, she admitted finally. I wanted today to be simple. I know, I said, but simple isn't always honest. Emily's shoulders sagged. What do we do now? We finish your wedding, I said. You marry Mark. You have your day. And later when you're ready, we talk like adults. She let out a shaky breath and nodded once, almost imperceptibly. I stood. I'm going to step back, I said. I'll sit in the very back. If you want me there, I'll be there. If you don't, I'll leave quietly. No hard feelings. Emily's head snapped up. No, she said quickly, and there was panic in it. Don't leave, not like that. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from her. I gave her a small nod. Okay, I said, I'll stay. When I stepped out into the hallway, I found Mark leaning against the wall. His tie loosened his face, drawn with worry. He looked up immediately. How is she? He asked. She's shaken, I said, but she'll be okay. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't want to ambush her. You didn't, I replied. You ambushed my father. A faint, weary smile tugged at his mouth. Yes, he admitted, I did. I studied him for a moment. Why, I asked, even though I already knew. Mark's eyes stayed steady. Because I've watched good people get treated like they're nothing, he said. And it changes them. I wasn't going to marry into a family where that was normal. Something in my chest loosened just a little. Down the hall I saw my father standing alone, staring at the floor as if he'd dropped something and couldn't find it. The proud man from earlier was gone. In his place was someone smaller, quieter. This wasn't revenge in the way people imagine revenge, loud and triumphant. This was consequences, and now we were all going to have to live in the truth. The wedding did go on. Not perfectly. Not with that bright, effortless cheer people like to pretend is the default for family celebrations. But it happened, and in a strange way that made it more honest. When the music started and my sister finally stepped into the aisle with her bouquet, the church rose the way it always does, older couples pushing up carefully from the pews, younger guests straightening their jackets. I stood in the back, hands folded, eyes on Emily, willing myself to make my presence small again. Emily's smile trembled at first, but then it steadied when Mark took her hand at the altar. Whatever else had been shaken that morning, their bond looked real, grounded, the kind of love built from seeing each other clearly. My father sat in the front row and didn't look back at me once. His shoulders stayed stiff through the vows, and he stared straight ahead as if the words honor and cherish were too sharp to turn toward. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the room clapped, and the applause came out warmer than I expected. People can be surprisingly generous when they sense something tender beneath the mess. At the reception, the energy was cautious at first, like everyone was unsure which version of the story they were allowed to believe. But the band started. The food arrived. Old friends hugged. Children darted under tables, chasing each other with the fearless joy of kids who don't carry family history yet. I stayed near the edge of the room, speaking to relatives who approached with careful smiles. So, Navy one aunt said, eyes wide like she was meeting a celebrity. All these years? I gave a polite nod. Yes, ma'am. Rear Admiral, she repeated slowly, tasting the words. Goodness, your mother would have been proud. That one hit me hard, but I kept my face calm. Thank you, I said. A few people asked where I lived. A few asked what I did exactly. I answered in broad strokes. I redirected the conversation back to Emily and Mark whenever I could. It was their day. It needed to stay their day. Mark found me about an hour in, holding 2 cups of coffee like he knew I'd prefer that over champagne. He handed one to me without a word. Thanks, I said, taking it. He leaned in slightly. Your father's been sitting outside on the patio, he murmured. Alone. My stomach tightened. Has he said anything? Mark shook his head. Not to me, but he looks like a man who doesn't know what to do with his hands. I nodded slowly. I know that look. Mark hesitated. If you want me to handle it? No, I said gently. This is mine. I carried my coffee through the side doors into the evening air. The reception was held at a modest country club, white lights strung along the patio rail, a small fountain bubbling quietly in the dark. It smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke. My father sat on a bench near the edge of the patio, elbows on his knees, staring out at the golf course like it might offer him a way to make sense of himself. I approached slowly, keeping my footsteps light. Dad, I said. He didn't look up right away. You're enjoying yourself, he asked, voice flat. I'm making sure Emily's okay, I replied. I sat on the bench at a respectful distance, leaving space between us like a boundary neither of us knew how to cross yet. He finally turned his head. His face was lined with exhaustion. All those years, he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat, trying to get control of it. All those years, and you let me look like a fool. I stared at him for a moment, and I chose my next words carefully, the way you choose words when you want a bridge instead of a fire. I didn't set out to humiliate you, I said. I didn't want any of that today. He scoffed, but it wasn't sharp. It sounded tired. Well, it happened. Yes, I said, it did. He looked away again. So what now, he muttered. Do I call you Admiral? Do I salute you? Do I bow? No, I said quickly, and I meant it. You call me your daughter, if you want to. That hung between us in the cooling air. My father's hands twisted together, and I saw something in him I'd only seen once a long time ago, when my mother's diagnosis came back, and he walked out to the shed and sat down like the floor had disappeared. He was a man who knew how to fix engines and roofs and budgets, but he didn't know how to fix regret. I didn't know, he said, quieter now. I nodded. I know. He swallowed hard. I thought you were ashamed, he admitted, that you'd messed up and you didn't want us to see it. I let out a slow breath. I wasn't ashamed, I said. I was tired, and I didn't want to spend every visit defending myself. His jaw clenched. You could have told me, he said again, but this time it didn't sound like accusation. It sounded like mourning. I tried, I said. In my own way. I sent you pictures. I sent you my address. I sent you letters when I was stationed overseas. He looked at me, pained. You didn't put Rear Admiral on the envelope, he muttered bitterly. I felt the sting of that, but I didn't snap back. No, I said, because I didn't want my rank to be the thing that earned your respect. His eyes watered, and he blinked quickly, angry at his own weakness. So, what then, he said. You wanted me to respect you for just existing. I softened my voice. I wanted you to love me, I said, the way you loved Emily, without conditions. The words sat heavy between us. The fountain bubbled behind us like a quiet metronome. My father stared out at the dark grass for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough and small. I messed up, he said. That was it. No poetry, no grand apology, just a blunt admission from a man not practiced in humility. I nodded slowly, letting him have that moment without demanding more. Yes, I said, you did. He flinched at my honesty, then exhaled, shoulders dropping. I don't know how to fix it, he admitted. You don't fix it tonight, I said. You start by being honest, and by stopping the story you've been telling people about me. He swallowed. I can do that, he said, almost like a promise. I studied him. And you stop using Mom like a weapon, I added quietly. She wouldn't want this. His face tightened and he nodded once hard. We sat there for a moment longer. Inside, laughter rose and fell. Somewhere Emily squealed with joy as someone spun her around the dance floor. The world kept moving. Finally, my father said, she's happy. Yes, I said, she is. He glanced at me, quick, uncertain. Are you? The question surprised me. It was the first time in years he'd asked anything about how I felt without turning it into an argument. I considered the honest answer. I'm learning, I said. And I'm tired of pretending I'm fine when I'm not. My father nodded slowly, and in that nod was something like the beginning of respect, not for my rank, but for my truth. Later, when we returned inside, he didn't announce anything. He didn't make a speech. He didn't perform remorse. But when a relative approached him and whispered, "Is it true your daughter's a Rear Admiral?" My father didn't puff up. He didn't minimize it. He didn't change the subject. He simply said yes, and I should have been proud long before I knew the title. That was the moment I felt something shift. Not a full healing, not forgiveness tied with a ribbon. Just the first real step toward becoming a family that told the truth. If you've made it this far with me, I hope you'll take one thought into your own life. Don't wait for a title, a uniform, or a headline to recognize someone's worth. The people who seem quiet, the ones who don't brag, the ones who show up in small ways, those are often the ones carrying the heaviest load. Ask them how they're doing. Tell them you're proud while you still can. And if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you've misunderstood, or someone you miss, leave a comment and share what you've learned along the way. Your words might help someone else feel less alone. And if you'd like more stories like this, stories about dignity, family, and hard-won reconciliation, please subscribe and stay with me.